Imagine a winter night so silent that even the snow seems to hold its breath. Out there in the cold, a police officer receives a call that sounds routine, until he opens a frozen kennel and meets a frightened German shepherd whose eyes carry the weight of abandonment. What begins that night is not just a rescue, but a slow, fragile journey toward trust, healing, and belonging between two souls who have both walked through storms inside and out. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from in the comments. I love knowing how far these stories travel. And if stories of hope and quiet miracles touch your heart, please press subscribe to support the channel so we can keep sharing them. Snow had a way of swallowing sound in Glendale County, turning the world into a quiet, white cathedral. The town of Glendale Ridge, tucked between dark pine forests and a frozen river, lay under a heavy winter sky that had forgotten what color the sun used to be. Streetlights burned in small golden halos over the plowed main road. But beyond the town limits, the world blurred into drifting snow, abandoned fields, and pale silhouettes of old industrial buildings. On nights like this, most people stayed home with their curtains drawn and their heaters humming. Nights like this belonged to plows, patrol cars, and the occasional soul who didn't have the luxury of avoiding the cold. Officer Daniel Rowan guided his patrol SUV along the county road, tires crunching over packed ice. He was a big man, not in a loud way but in a solid way, broad shoulders filling out his dark winter jacket, jaw marked by a faint, permanent shadow of stubble. His brown hair, flecked with a few early strands of gray, was cropped short out of old habit. There was a stillness to him that didn't feel indifferent so much as contained, like a river held in by strong banks. Years before, the military had taught him how to move quickly, react decisively, survive chaos. Years after, therapy had tried to teach him what to do with the quiet that came afterward. His eyes, steady hazel with a tired edge, scanned the dark road the way another man might scan a crowd at a party, always checking for exits, always watching shadows. The radio crackled to life, cutting through the muffled silence inside the cruiser. Dispatch came through in the familiar voice of Kelly Hargrove, the night dispatcher. Kelly was in her 40s, with a calm, no-nonsense tone that somehow carried warmth even through static. A woman who'd seen every kind of emergency pass across her desk, and still remembered that there were people at the other end of each call. "Unit 7 Alpha, this is dispatch," her voice said, soft but precise. "We have a report from a local resident. Persistent scratching and whining noises at the old McAllister lumber yard. Caller suspects an animal may be trapped. Location is the north storage shed." "Copy." Daniel reached for the radio mic, eyes still on the road. "Dispatch 7 Alpha, copy that. Show me responding to McAllister Yard. ETA approximately 9 minutes. 10-4, 7 Alpha. Logging a possible trapped animal. Be advised, caller reported the sounds have been going on for hours." There was a small pause, and though protocol didn't require it, Kelly added quietly, "Watch your footing out there, Rowan. That ice is no joke." The corner of Daniel's mouth lifted like the memory of a smile. "Copy the ice warning, dispatch. 7 Alpha out." The road narrowed as he left the last of the town's lights behind. The forest thickened, heavy branches bowed under the weight of snow. His headlights washed over wooden fences, abandoned fields, the frozen skeleton of an old billboard that nobody had bothered to replace. In another life, he might have listened to music, hummed along, filled the silence. In this one, he let the quiet sit with him. It had become a sort of companion. Not comfortable exactly, but familiar. The hulking shape of the McAllister lumber yard emerged from the swirling snow like a shipwreck trapped on land. The yard had been shut down for years, its wooden fences broken in places, its main building a long, dark, hulking mass with shattered windows and a sagging roof. Rusty machinery and forgotten stacks of timber lay scattered like bones beneath the snowdrifts. Daniel pulled the cruiser to a stop just outside the main gate, engine idling, exhaust curling up into the cold air. He switched on the body cam clipped to his vest, watching for the soft indicator light that told him it was recording. Procedure first. Feelings later. "Dispatch, this is 7 Alpha, he said into the radio. "I'm on scene at McAllister Yard, beginning perimeter sweep, body cam recording." "Copy, 7 Alpha, standing by," Kelly replied. Daniel stepped out into the night, the cold biting instantly at the exposed skin around his jaw. Snow crunched sharply under his boots. He drew a deep breath. The air tasted like iron and pine and old wood, then clicked on his flashlight, a strong, narrow beam that cut into the darkness. He moved along the fence line and through the open gate, scanning each mound of snow, each broken stack of pallets, each shadow that could hide movement. The world here felt abandoned and watchful, like an old story that hadn't been finished. For a while, all he heard was wind, creaking boards, and the occasional drip of melting ice. Then he froze. There, faint. Muffled. A sound that didn't belong to the wind. A soft, unsteady whine, barely audible over the distant groan of the trees. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing, then followed it, past an old forklift half buried in snow, around a collapsed section of fencing, toward the smaller outbuildings at the back of the property. The sound sharpened as he approached the north storage shed, a long, low structure whose sliding door hung crooked on its track. Daniel paused outside, listening. The whine came again, higher this time, edged with fear, followed by the faint scrape of something against metal. He raised the radio to his mouth. "Dispatch, 7 Alpha. I have audible confirmation of an animal in distress, possible confinement, north storage shed. Proceeding to make entry. Body cam will document." 10-4, 7 Alpha. Recording note added, Kelly answered. He used his shoulder to push the sliding door aside just enough to slip in. Inside, the air was colder, the scent of old sawdust and oil lingering beneath the sharp smell of rust. His flashlight beams swept over stacked lumber, coils of chain, forgotten tools. The whining grew louder, raw and desperate now. "Easy," he murmured automatically, though there was no one yet in front of him to hear. He rounded a stack of warped plywood, and there it was. A metal kennel, half buried in a drift of snow that had blown in through a broken window. Ice clung to the bars, frost feathering along the metal. A heavy padlock sealed the latch. Inside, curled as far from the opening as possible, was a young German shepherd. The dog's fur, which might once have been a rich black and tan, was dull and tangled now, clumped with ice. His ribs showed clearly under his coat. Each breath made them rise and fall too sharply. His ears were flattened back, tail tucked so tightly under that it almost disappeared. His eyes, a deep, wary amber, flicked up toward the light, not in hopeful recognition, but in wary calculation. Fear lived in that gaze, but so did stubborn, exhausted determination. Daniel felt his chest tighten, but he kept his movements deliberate and calm. The camera on his chest recorded everything: the kennel, the lock, the snow built up around it, the thin, trembling body inside. He angled the flashlight so the lens could see clearly, then spoke for the record. "Dispatch, 7 Alpha, confirmed. Locked metal kennel partially buried in snow. One juvenile German shepherd inside. Visible malnourishment, possible hypothermia. Kennel is secured with a padlock. Recording evidence for unlawful confinement." The dog flinched at the sound of his voice, pressing harder into the back corner of the kennel as far as the space allowed. "Copy, 7 Alpha," Kelly replied, voice slightly tighter now. "Do you require authorization for forced entry?" "Affirmative," Daniel said. "Requesting authorization to remove lock and extract animal due to immediate risk to life. Body cam documenting. Will preserve lock and surrounding area as evidence." There was a short pause, radio static filling the gap. Daniel watched the dog, breathing slow on purpose, knowing that animals felt the rhythm of the people near them. 7 Alpha, authorization granted, Kelly confirmed at last. "Proceed with removal. We'll notify County Animal Rescue and pre-open a case file. Keep the lock and any related evidence secured." 10-4. Daniel unclipped a compact set of bolt cutters from his belt, positioning them carefully around the padlock. His gloved hands moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd done a lot of things in his life that required calm under pressure. The lock snapped with a dull metallic crack that echoed strangely in the cold air. He set the broken lock aside in a marked evidence bag from his pocket, narrating the time and action for the body cam. Then he crouched lower, opening the kennel door slowly so the hinges wouldn't screech. "Hey," he said softly, voice lowering out of habit when talking to anything scared. "A child, a witness, a dog. I'm not going to drag you out. You've had enough of that." Up close, the dog's condition was even clearer. The young shepherd, maybe 8 or 9 months old, had large paws that promised a future size he'd not yet grown into, and a head proportionally a bit too big for his underfed body. His coat was patchy along the neck, where something rough had rubbed against his skin over and over. His breathing came in shallow, fast puffs. A slight tremor ran through his legs. It would have been so easy, in a softer story, for the dog to leap forward into Daniel's arms, to lick his face, to instantly recognize a savior. But life hadn't taught this animal to trust sudden hands. Life had taught him that closed spaces and cold metal and human voices could mean hurt. So he stayed where he was, pressed to the back of the kennel, staring out with that sharp, mistrustful gaze. Daniel extended one gloved hand into the opening, not to grab, not to corner, just to rest on the kennel floor, palm turned slightly upward. "You get to make the first move," he murmured. Snow shifted against the outside wall as the wind picked up. Somewhere, a loose sheet of metal rattled in the gust. The dog's eyes flicked from the hand to Daniel's face, back to the hand, then beyond him to the open world. A stretch of dark, snow-filled air he wasn't sure he could survive, but neither could he endure what he'd already known. Slowly, paws shaking, the shepherd edged forward. One step. Stop. Sniff the air. Another step. The tip of his nose brushed Daniel's glove, testing the scent. Cold leather, faint traces of coffee, the lingering chemical smell of cleaning solution from the cruiser. Something that had no memory of violence for him yet. "That's it," Daniel whispered. "You're doing this, not me." With a final tentative movement, the dog crossed the threshold. His body nearly collapsed as he stepped out, legs wobbling under his weight. Daniel slid the blanket from under his arm, a thick gray thermal one from the cruiser, and draped it gently across the dog's back, giving him time to adjust before wrapping it tighter. For a heartbeat, the shepherd stiffened, eyes going wide. Then, feeling heat for the first time in who knew how long, he sagged slightly into the fabric. Daniel lifted him carefully, supporting the dog's chest and hindquarters, mindful of how little padding there was over bone. The shepherd didn't struggle, but he didn't relax either. His body stayed tense, like a spring wound too tight, ready to snap at any sudden motion. Daniel carried him out into the night, his boots sinking into the snow that had nearly swallowed the kennel. In the distance, the town was just a faint suggestion of lights across the white expanse. "Dispatch 7 Alpha, he said as he approached the cruiser, breath-making ghosts in the air. "Animal extracted. Condition: underweight, possible dehydration and exposure. I'll be transporting to Glendale Ridge Veterinary Clinic. Request animal rescue to initiate temporary foster case and send digital forms to my station email. Copy 7 Alpha. County Animal Rescue is on alert. Temporary foster file will be opened under your badge number. Sending a preliminary case ID to your mobile now," Kelly replied. "You're clear to proceed." Daniel eased the dog into the back seat of the cruiser, not in a cage, but onto the bench itself, still wrapped in the blanket. He left space between himself and the dog, positioning the blanket so the animal could choose whether to cuddle into it or pull away. The shepherd settled awkwardly, paws tucked underneath, spine curved like a bowstring. He did not move closer to Daniel. He did not rest his head on a human knee or seek out a comforting hand. His eyes, still sharp despite exhaustion, watched Daniel with a wary intensity, as if waiting for the moment this small pocket of safety would turn out to be another cage. Daniel closed the door gently, then climbed into the driver's seat. Snowflakes melted against the windshield as the wipers swept back and forth, revealing the pale ribbon of road ahead. For a moment, he just sat there, letting the heater fight back the cold air. The presence behind him was almost a vibration, silent, tense, alive. "You're not obligated to trust me," he said into the quiet, not sure if he was talking to the dog, to himself, or to both. "The law says I'm responsible for you tonight, but the choice of whether I'm safe or not, that's yours. Take your time." He checked the mirror once. The shepherd's gaze met his, suspicious, exhausted, but no longer empty. Somewhere inside that thin frame, a small instinct had chosen movement over paralysis, chosen the unknown over certain suffering. Daniel turned on his blinker, pulled the cruiser back onto the road, and drove toward the lights of Glendale Ridge through a curtain of falling snow. In the back seat, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like a life he didn't understand yet, the dog stayed where he was, not closer, not farther away, caught between fear and the first fragile possibility that the world might hold something other than cruelty. He did not yet have a name in his own mind, but in Daniel's, somewhere behind the training and the paperwork and the protocols, a single word had already surfaced like a quiet promise: Bruin. The night closed around them, cold and wide, as a tired man and a frightened dog rode together toward whatever would come next. The snow was still falling over Glendale Ridge when Daniel pulled into the parking area of the Glendale Veterinary and Animal Care Clinic, the low brick building glowing warm against the night with lamplight spilling from tall windows. The clinic sign rattled in the wind, outlining a stylized paw print that had lost half its paint. Inside, the night staff were sparse, which was why Dr. Meredith Langley herself came to the door. Meredith was 33, slight of build, and a little shorter than average, with pale freckles across her nose and intelligent blue-gray eyes that tended to look through a situation rather than merely at it. Her auburn hair was tied back in a loose, functional bun, and she wore a scrub top patterned with cartoon foxes, something that always made nervous animals relax, according to her belief. Her personality was best described as quietly capable. She didn't waste words, didn't rush movement, and had the kind of patient presence that animals trusted faster than humans did. Years ago, Meredith had briefly interned at a high-intensity emergency animal center in Chicago, where she saw cruelty more systematic and more casual than she'd ever imagined. That experience changed her. It made her gentle, but it also made her unflinchingly honest about suffering. When Daniel exited the vehicle, gently lifting the wrapped dog from the back seat, Meredith didn't gasp or rush forward like some might. She simply opened the door wider and stepped aside so he could pass. "Bring him straight in," she said, voice low and steady. "I've got the exam room warmed up." Inside, the clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and wet fur. Posters of healthy dogs and cats lined the walls, cheerful but not naive. Daniel carried the shepherd into exam room 2, laying him carefully on the padded table. Meredith approached slowly, hands visible, movements deliberately calm. She didn't reach for his head, didn't stroke his ears, didn't croon meaningless comfort words. Instead, she extended a single hand, palm down, letting the young dog sniff the air around it. The shepherd, Bruin, lowered his head slightly, nostrils twitching. His tail did not wag, but neither did he shrink away this time. Meredith nodded once, accepting the exchange. Then she began her examination, methodical, meticulous, calling each finding aloud for the record and for Daniel's understanding. Temperature, low but responsive. Hydration, poor, he's dehydrated. She gently inspected the neck, where the fur was worn thin. Marking consistent with prolonged collar friction, possibly tied or restrained for extended periods. She checked his gums. Color is pale, indicates anemia or malnutrition. She lifted one paw gently, revealing cracked, reddened skin between pads. Exposure injury, probably from standing on cold or wet metal. Through it all, Bruin remained tense but cooperative, not because he trusted these humans, but because he had learned that resistance only exhausted him faster. When Meredith finished, she turned to Daniel. "He's young, maybe 9 months, good bone structure, heart sounds steady. With proper care, he'll recover physically." She hesitated before continuing. "Psychologically, he's been hurt, not violently necessarily, but consistently. Dogs don't stop trusting from one bad moment. It happens over weeks, months of being ignored, restrained, punished for existing." Daniel listened, jaw tightening slightly. His gaze drifted for a moment to the wall, though his eyes seemed to see something far away. Perhaps another dog, another cold night, another failure he couldn't undo. Meredith moved to the counter and retrieved several documents from a file folder, forms already printed, labeled with the temporary case ID sent by dispatch. "This is the temporary foster contract, assigning legal custodianship to you under veterinary supervision. You're responsible for feeding, sheltering, and monitoring. We'll schedule vaccinations after he stabilizes." She handed him a small stack of papers. "This is the vaccination schedule. This is the psychological care recommendation. mainly patience, controlled exposure, no forced contact. She slid the last page forward. And here is the state-mandated intake record noting the evidence of unlawful confinement. You'll need to sign all places with the yellow tabs. Daniel took the pen and began signing. Slow, neat, precise. Meanwhile, Meredith prepared a saline bag and inserted a tiny needle into Bruin's flank. A subcutaneous fluid injection to help with dehydration. Bruin stiffened at the prick, ears pulling back, eyes flashing. Daniel spoke softly. "It's okay. She's helping." Bruin's breathing eased gradually. When Meredith finished, she stepped back, giving space again. "He'll need a calm environment tonight. Lots of water, in a shallow bowl. Deep bowls can create reflections that make some traumatized dogs skittish." Daniel nodded. "I've seen that before." Meredith raised an eyebrow at him, a quiet invitation to explain. Daniel did, briefly. "When I worked with military K-9 units, one of our dogs had been kept in basements as a pup before training. Deep steel bowls reflected his eyes back at him. He thought he was looking at another dog, and reacted aggressively. It took us weeks to get him comfortable with water again." Meredith listened, absorbing the information, not pressing for more. Then she looked at Bruin again. "He'll respond to stability. He needs to see that your presence is predictable." She reached once more toward Bruin, slowly, letting him sniff again before letting her fingers brush just under his chin for a half second. Then she withdrew. "That's enough for tonight." Daniel finished signing the last page of documents. He handed them back with official gravity. "I'll follow every instruction given." Meredith smiled softly. Not a cheerful smile, but one of mutual understanding between professionals. "I know you will." She gathered the papers, filed them, and then returned with a small white container of antibiotic ointment and a written care sheet. Daniel lifted Bruin again, carefully, keeping him wrapped in the blanket. As they walked toward the door, Bruin's head remained upright, not resting on Daniel's chest, still alert, still wary. Under the clinic lights, his eyes looked almost golden, beautiful but tired. Outside, the snow had continued its silent siege of the world, blanketing tires and roofs and trees in its cold softness. A sharp wind swept through the parking lot, rattling metal and stirring powder. Daniel opened the passenger door and gently laid Bruin inside again. When he shut the door and turned back, Meredith stood a few paces away, arms crossed against the cold. Her voice carried through the still air. "He doesn't know it yet, but tonight was the turning point." Daniel gave a slow nod. "I won't rush him." Meredith nodded back, a quiet moment of agreement, then returned into the clinic, door closing behind her. Daniel got behind the wheel, engine warming again. He looked once more into the mirror. Bruin sat exactly as before, still as stone, still guarded. Daniel spoke into the quiet. "You're going home with me tonight, but home doesn't have to mean trust yet. You set the pace." The dog blinked slowly. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection. And for the first night, that was enough. The wind had finally quieted by the time Daniel carried Bruin into his home, a modest one-story house on the edge of Glendale Ridge, where the land opened into fields that in summer would be green, but now were buried beneath snow. The hallway radiated warmth from the central heating, but the atmosphere remained calm and intentionally subdued. No sudden brightness, no loud sounds, no clatter of objects, just soft amber lamplight and the faint crackling of the fireplace in the living room. Daniel didn't speak at first. Words could be intrusive, almost aggressive to a dog taught to brace against sudden commands. He moved slowly, letting Bruin see him clearly, letting their surroundings become predictable rather than surprising. The interior smelled of wood, wool blankets, and something faintly earthy, coffee grounds mixed with winter air, a scent that Bruin instinctively recognized as neutral, not threatening. Daniel set Bruin down gently on a thick rug near the living room hearth. Then he backed away, not sharply, not with exaggerated caution, just enough distance to show that Bruin's space was Bruin's space. For the first hour, Daniel didn't attempt interaction beyond observing. Bruin's behavior followed a pattern of survival. He found the nearest corner, the intersection of wall and cabinet, curled tightly into it, body pressed to the surface, facing outward so nothing could approach him unseen from behind. His eyes tracked Daniel whenever he moved, but slowly, not with curiosity, with assessment. Daniel prepared water in a shallow ceramic bowl. He set it down 4 feet away and then stepped back. Bruin didn't approach it first. Hunger and thirst were instincts, but fear had been taught. After almost 7 minutes, the young shepherd uncurled slightly, nose testing the air, paws shifting forward cautiously. He approached the bowl, drank quickly, then retreated back to the wall. Evening turned into deep night. The world outside held nothing but darkness and snow. Inside, Daniel changed into a soft gray sweatshirt for warmth and comfort. Then he made a deliberate decision, one of the small gestures that would become meaningful. He took the sweatshirt he'd worn earlier, carrying his scent, and placed it gently near Bruin's resting spot, but not in direct contact. The shirt lay there as an object of silent introduction. "This is how I smell. I am here. I mean no harm." Bruin sniffed it once, then returned to watching the room, but his breathing slowed. Eventually, exhaustion overcame vigilance. He didn't sleep in the open. He slept pressed against the wall, on the floor, curled into a defensive shape. Daniel chose the armchair farthest away, sat down with a book. He didn't read much of it. He simply let the hours pass, letting Bruin know that the night would be uneventful. No shouting, no blows, no kicking, no chains, only stillness. When dawn crept weakly through the frosted windows, Bruin's behavior began to show the first microscopic shift. On day 1, he slept with his entire spine braced against the wall, his body always guarded. On day 3, he slept not touching the wall, but still facing the open room with his head up. On day 6, he allowed himself to lie flat on the rug, body less coiled. And on day 10, something subtle yet monumental happened. Bruin approached the space near Daniel's work table. Daniel was writing notes on the legal aspects of the confinement case, documenting evidence for the eventual investigation. He didn't call Bruin, didn't pat his thigh, didn't make kissing sounds or coaxing noises. He kept writing, letting Bruin choose proximity. The shepherd stood near him for 30 seconds, then retreated. But the line had been crossed. Bruin had moved toward him. And on day 14th, the turning point arrived. Daniel sat on the floor beside the couch, reading. Bruin approached quietly, not with a wagging tail, not with eager affection, but with calm intention. He lay down beside Daniel's right leg. His body touched Daniel's ankle, tentatively, but purposefully. Daniel didn't look down at him immediately. Instead, he placed one hand, palm open, on the rug. Not on Bruin, but available. After a moment, Bruin inclined his head and pressed his muzzle gently onto the back of Daniel's hand. Not licking, not nuzzling. Just contact. A declaration in silence. Daniel whispered, "Good," and nothing more, because trust didn't need ceremony. During these 2 weeks, Daniel had established a routine, a rhythm of presence. He worked at his small wooden desk in the living room for several hours each day. He cooked simple meals, making sure Bruin heard the same familiar sounds, the scrape of a pan, the clink of utensils, the tone of Daniel's footsteps. He played no loud music, made no sudden noises. He did speak to Bruin occasionally, but never to demand. He used statements rather than commands. "I'm going to the kitchen now. I'll be back in a minute. I'm just turning on the light." These words weren't for information. They were for reassurance. Bruin started reacting to tone before language. He could tell when Daniel's mood was steady, and Daniel made sure it always was. Controlled breathing, regulated voice, not just for himself, but for the dog who watched him like a barometer. Sometimes, in the evening, Daniel would sit a few feet away from Bruin and speak quietly. Not dramatic monologues, but simple truths. "Screwdrivers, that word makes you think of punishment, doesn't it?" Or, "There were days you thought no one cared if you made it through the night." And one evening, under soft yellow lamplight, he said the simplest thing. "Being afraid isn't a fault. It's proof that you survived." Bruin's eyes softened, not with understanding of language, but with recognition of tone, of safety, of gentleness. Daniel also made careful decisions about boundaries. He did not bathe Bruin immediately. He did not attempt grooming. He didn't even try to play. Those would come later. First came security, then predictability, then choice. One method Daniel used was physical mirroring, the principle of presence, not command. When Bruin walked through a doorway, Daniel followed at the same pace. When Bruin stopped in a hallway, Daniel stopped. When Bruin sat, Daniel would sometimes sit nearby, never looming above him, never cornering. The result was powerful. Bruin started seeing Daniel not as a handler, but as a companion. One evening, around day 11, a gust of wind slammed snow against the window, a sound like a sharp slap. Bruin tensed instantly, body rigid. Daniel didn't react dramatically. He took a deep, slow breath, audible, then another, then a third. Bruin watched, his ears lowered, his breathing matched Daniel's, and the fear began to ebb, without being touched, without being restrained, without being managed, just shared. By the end of the second week, Bruin had learned the geography of safety inside the house, the rug near the hearth, under the dining table, beside Daniel's desk, and eventually, the place near Daniel's feet. But the most meaningful milestone was not physical closeness. It was what Daniel recognized one morning when Bruin was sleeping. Bruin's back was exposed. He was sleeping not pressed against a wall, not curled defensively, but stretched out, belly partially visible, legs slightly open, face relaxed. This wasn't submission. It was peace, hard-won, fragile, but real. Daniel didn't disturb him. He simply sat nearby, coffee in hand, and let the quiet morning hold them both. Outside, snow continued its slow descent across the land. Inside, trust was building, grain by grain, with the same quiet inevitability. Bruin had not yet given his heart, but he had given something equally important: permission. Permission for Daniel to exist near him without being a threat, and permission for Bruin to exist without being punished for it. And so, the chapter closed with simple grace. Daniel sitting on the floor, Bruin asleep beside him, not tightly coiled against a wall, but resting with his body against Daniel's leg, sharing warmth in the soft winter silence. No dramatic vows, no triumphant music, just two souls breathing in rhythm, the beginning of belonging. The first real storm of January came in hard, without warning, like an old buried memory surfacing. The meteorologists had predicted snow, but no one had predicted this snow, a white, swirling force that hammered against the windows and howled across the roof, turning the world outside into a shapeless blur of cold and noise. It was nearing midnight when the wind first struck the house with the force of a thrown stone. The windows shivered, the fireplace hissed as a draft found its way in. Bruin woke instantly, jerked awake really, ears sharp, eyes wide, body taut like a wire. The storm sounded too much like something he recognized: metal rattling, hard echoes, wind that mimicked the muffled roar of transportation, confinement, something unseen and loud. Daniel had been on the couch, half asleep. The sound ripped through something inside him too, and suddenly, he wasn't seeing his living room. He was seeing sand, darkness, a roaring helicopter, a hangar echoing with commands. That night, years ago. That night when they lost Coda, his first K9 partner, a fiercely loyal Malinois who never made it back after an explosion in an alleyway in Kandahar. The pressure hit Daniel's chest like a wave. Panic flared, but not the wild, consuming panic of years past. Therapy had taught him to recognize the first spike of adrenaline, the first narrowing of vision, the first instinct to dissociate. Hands shaking slightly, he pressed them into the couch cushion, closed his eyes. Slow breath in, through nose, hold, slow exhale, through mouth. Again, again, again. Bruin watched him. The dog's own fear was raw, his body pacing tight circles, nails tapping on the hardwood floor. He looked to Daniel like a young soldier scanning a sergeant's face in crisis. The house rumbled softly with the wind. Another gust struck hard, rattling the windows like a shout. Bruin flinched. Daniel inhaled again, long, steady, deliberate. His voice came out low but firm, quiet enough to not be forceful. "I'm all right." He wasn't yet, but he would be. He could choose calm. He had learned how. That mattered. Bruin stared at him, puzzled at first, the dog equivalent of a confused frown, watching his slow chest movements, studying them. Daniel continued his slow breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Bruin's ears lowered, his pacing slowed. His breathing, high and thin with anxiety, began to shift. Not consciously, not cognitively, but by instinct, as mammals often mirror the patterns of those they trust. 2 deep breaths later, the shepherd sat down beside the couch, close but not touching. His eyes flicked between Daniel and the storm-lashed window. Daniel leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees. "Storm's just noise," he murmured, "just wind doing what wind does." The fireplace creaked, the rafters hummed. Bruin let out one soft whine, not a panic whine, but a question, a check-in. "Are we safe?" And Daniel, still steadying himself, breathing deeply, answered gently, "Yes. Here. We're safe." He wasn't giving false reassurance. He was naming truth. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, the air gradually calmed. After several minutes of shared stillness, Bruin did something he had never done before. Very slowly, with the careful dignity of an animal that never forgot caution, he nudged forward, lowered his head, and pressed his muzzle against Daniel's palm, not seeking petting, not begging for comfort. It was something else, something primal and honest. "I choose to touch you." Daniel did not curl his fingers around Bruin's head or stroke him behind the ears. He simply rotated his hand upward so Bruin's muzzle rested gently in his open palm. Contact, mutual, equal, no grabbing, no forcing, just presence. Daniel murmured, "Good boy," and the words were less command, less praise, and more acknowledgement. A warm acknowledgement that they weren't 2 creatures trapped by fear. They were 2 creatures moving through it. Minutes passed like that, silent and connected. The storm raged on, but they were no longer reacting to it. They were breathing through it. Daniel eventually shifted into a sitting position on the floor, back against the couch, and Bruin lowered himself next to him, not on top of him or against him, but beside him, shoulder to thigh. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, the breathing stayed steady. Daniel spoke once more, barely above a whisper. "Fear doesn't mean weakness. It just means you've seen things that mattered." Bruin closed his eyes. His breathing slowed further. Daniel's did too. The storm battered the windows 3 more times, hard. But neither man nor dog reacted violently anymore. The house seemed to learn their calm. Or maybe they learned the house's strength. Hours later, when the storm finally began to weaken, Daniel realized something profound. Bruin wasn't just looking to him for security. Bruin had offered security too. When he pressed that muzzle into Daniel's hand, that wasn't comfort sought, that was comfort given. Morning crept in eventually, pale, soft, still shaky. The snow lay thick and silent. The world had been washed white again. Daniel rose stiffly from the floor, and Bruin rose too, stretching, shaking his coat, ears flicking forward. He walked to the window and looked out, his posture no longer defensive, but curious. And Daniel realized something. This wasn't the night Bruin forgot fear. This was the night Bruin learned resilience. And it wasn't the night Daniel forgot loss. It was the night he remembered healing. They ate breakfast in quiet companionship, Daniel with oatmeal and coffee, Bruin with softened kibble. And while neither celebrated aloud, something had shifted inside the house. The winter storm had been a test, not of bravery, but of breathing, not of obedience, but of chosen closeness, and both souls had passed, not spectacularly, not dramatically, but honestly. This wasn't a story of a hero saving a dog, nor a dog saving a man, but of 2 beings who, broken in their own ways, learned to sit beside their fear until it quieted. Winter settled deeper over Glendale Ridge, turning the world into something hushed and contemplative. The snowbanks along the rural road had frozen into rounded shapes, like white dunes. The air each morning lingered at sub-zero temperatures, crisp and sharp. But Daniel and Bruin were beginning to develop a ritual, a sort of non-verbal morning communion with the day. Daniel would open the front door, step onto the porch, and wait. Not call, not whistle, just wait. Bruin would emerge on his own time, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but always with a hint of anticipation. He didn't leap or bound like a typical young dog. His movements still held a quiet caution, but that caution had transformed. Less fear, more awareness. They walked down the long driveway together. Daniel's strides were calm, measured. Bruin matched them, not because he had been taught heel, but because movement beside Daniel felt correct. When Daniel slowed, Bruin slowed. When Daniel stopped at the end of the driveway, Bruin halted. When Daniel looked right and stepped onto the quiet road, Bruin followed, all without a word. Neighbors sometimes peeked through their frost-dappled windows or paused on their duff-covered porches to watch the pair. One of them, Howard Minter, a retired postman in his late 60s with a stooped back and a permanently bemused expression, once commented while shoveling his front walk, "That dog's watching you like you're speaking a language I can't hear." Daniel chuckled softly. "Maybe I am." Howard smiled, nodded once, then returned to his shoveling. Howard wasn't a central figure in the story, just one of those quiet presences in town who had seen too many winters to be surprised by much. During the walks, Daniel didn't give commands such as heel, sit, stay, or come. The only command Bruin learned at this stage was presence. Daniel would sometimes stop walking, look at the horizon, maybe take in the silence or check the distant tree line. Bruin would stop too, waiting, watching. Sometimes Daniel sat on the porch steps after their walk. He was a still figure, sturdy but quiet, hands clasped loosely, gaze soft. Bruin would come sit beside him, not touching, but close. On day 19th, Bruin did something new. He lay down next to Daniel and stretched his body so that his back rested against Daniel's hip. A full lean, not tentative this time, but firm, confident. Daniel didn't react dramatically. He simply breathed in, breathed out, and let the weight of Bruin's body settle warmly against him. One afternoon, as they approached the tree line, an unexpected figure flashed across the snowy path. A deer. Lean and swift, its hooves flicked through the powder, leaving a narrow trail of disturbed snow. Bruin stiffened. His instincts surged. He barked, not a cheerful bark, not playful, but a sharp alert. Intruder. Movement. Unknown. For a split second, his body coiled to give chase. The old impulse to pursue, to react. Daniel didn't yank his collar, didn't yell, didn't grab. Instead, he simply moved, stepping in front of Bruin, blocking his view gently, positioning himself as a wall of calm. He spoke softly. "Stay with me." Not a command, an invitation. Bruin breathed hard, gaze locked on the retreating deer, until, slowly, he looked up and saw Daniel's steady, anchored form. That changed the decision. Bruin didn't chase. He chose Daniel's stillness over pursuit. Daniel smiled faintly. "Good reporting," he murmured, "but we don't run after wild things out here." Bruin sneezed, that odd canine snort that indicated he had energy but understood the moment's shift. Back at the house, another milestone awaited. Earlier in the week, Meredith had delivered a collar for Bruin, a sturdy leather one, deep brown, with a simple brass buckle and a tag engraved with his name. Daniel had placed it on a high shelf in plain view, not hidden, not forced. Each day Bruin would glance at the collar, sometimes sniff it, but he never approached it directly. The house's interior had become a sanctuary of consistent signals and gentle quiet. Daniel's routine was stable. He worked at his desk in the mornings, did paperwork in the afternoons, occasionally answered calls from the department, always with Bruin nearby. An unobtrusive shadow. The collar stayed untouched. Daniel would sometimes comment quietly, almost conversationally. "When you feel like this is home, I'll put that on you. Not before." Bruin didn't seem to understand the words, but somehow understood the waiting. Evenings were reserved for porch time. Daniel would sit on those steps with a mug of tea, Bruin beside him, while twilight painted the small houses of Glendale Ridge in lavender and blue. Sometimes a distant car would pass. Bruin would lift his head, alert, but no longer frightened. Sometimes wind would move through the trees. Bruin would look, ears twitching, then relax again. Sometimes Daniel would speak, "You don't have to earn calm. It's already yours." Or, "You're learning that stillness isn't the same as danger." Or, "We don't react to every sound. We choose which sounds matter." Bruin didn't understand language, but he understood tone, and Daniel's tone was a shelter. Training, if the word even applied, extended into indoor behavior. Daniel would walk from the living room to the kitchen. Bruin would follow. Bruin didn't cling, didn't crowd. He walked parallel, slightly behind, eyes watchful but soft. Daniel would stop. Bruin would stop. Daniel would turn. Bruin would turn. It wasn't obedience, it was harmony. Daniel sometimes imagined that Bruin had learned to move, like water, flowing around furniture, sliding past doorways, always aware, never disruptive. The house ceased to be merely Daniel's. It became theirs, with pathways worn into the air by shared motion. One evening, Daniel reached up and took the collar from the shelf, not to put it on Bruin, just to hold it. He sat cross-legged on the floor and placed the collar beside him. Bruin noticed. He approached, cautiously, curiously. He sniffed the collar, then looked at Daniel. Daniel smiled gently and said, "When you're ready." Bruin turned away, slowly, thoughtfully, and returned to lying by the hearth. Daniel didn't feel disappointment. He felt respect. Trust wasn't measured by accessories. It was measured by proximity, by the slow drift of Bruin's sleeping body closer to Daniel each night, until even separation felt strange. Later that same night, Daniel stood by the window, looking into the snowy dark. He sensed Bruin behind him, then felt a quiet weight press against his leg. Daniel didn't look down at first. He just rested his hand on Bruin's back, palm open, fingers relaxed. That was the real collar, the invisible one, made of comfort, not leather. Bruin leaned into it, not seeking, just being. The storm had passed days ago, leaving snow that glittered under pale daylight like crushed crystal. The sky was washed out blue, and the pines bore cloaks of frozen white. On that morning, Daniel was repairing a loose hinge on the backyard fence, working with even rhythm and quiet patience, while Bruin lay nearby on the snow-dusted boards of the back porch, eyes half closed, tail lying still, ears relaxed. The radio clipped to Daniel's belt crackled. "Dispatch to 7 Alpha. We've got a missing person report. Elderly female, late 70s. Mild dementia. Last seen near the walking trail by Ridgewood Forest. Family lost sight of her during a morning outing. They turned away for a minute. She wandered off. They've been searching for an hour, temperatures dropping, requesting assistance." Daniel felt his body shift into alertness, not panic, just readiness. He pressed the radio. "Copy, dispatch, 7 Alpha responding, ETA 15 minutes. He turned to Bruin. Not a command, just a sentence. "We're going to help someone." Bruin rose at once, not because of the words, but because of the tone of forward motion, the tone of purpose. At the trailhead, a small search group had gathered, 2 family members pale with worry, 1 other officer, and a forest ranger. The missing woman's name was Eleanor Price, a petite grandmother whose affection for ritual morning walks had not been deterred by age or memory decline. Her daughter stood anxiously wringing her gloved hands, repeating fragments. "She was right behind me. I only turned for a moment. She drifted off the path." Daniel stepped forward with composed empathy. He didn't promise miracles, just reassurance in stable tone. "We'll find her." Bruin stood beside him, poised, tail low, ears alert but calm. They entered the forest, and quiet enveloped them. Ridgewood Forest in winter felt like a realm of whispers. Snow lay deep, muffling footsteps and wrapping each sound in distance. The air smelled of pine resin and cold bark. Daniel scanned the area visually. He didn't direct Bruin with commands. He simply walked slowly, letting Bruin's instincts and curiosity find rhythm with his movement. Minutes passed, just movement and breathing and the hush of snow. Then Bruin paused. He lowered his head to the ground, sniffing, then took 3 careful steps to the left. Daniel followed him. Bruin exhaled sharply, nostrils fluttering. A print, a light indentation in the snow. Not hoof, not paw, too round, too flat. Footprint. Daniel crouched, examining the depression. The tread was shallow, a soft boot, small size. Good, he murmured. Again, not command, not reward, simply acknowledgement. Bruin continued following the faint trail, not tracking with the precision of a trained canine, but following scent and disturbance with instinct, curiosity, and growing confidence. Every few yards he would stop, lift his head toward Daniel as if checking, "Are we on the same page?" And every time, Daniel answered softly, "Yes, keep going." 20 minutes into the woods, Bruin suddenly halted. His ears pricked forward, his body went still. He let out a single bark, short, sharp, intentional, not frantic, just alert. Daniel approached and saw it, a scrap of wool caught on a bramble, light blue, like the scarf Eleanor had been wearing according to the family's description. Daniel raised his radio. "Dispatch 7 Alpha, found article of clothing, we're on good sign, continuing deeper into forest." "Copy, 7 Alpha, keep us updated." Bruin looked up, reading Daniel's energy. They pressed forward. At last, near an old fallen birch, they found her. Eleanor Price sat curled against the trunk, knees drawn to chest, arms wrapped around them. Her coat was dusted with frost. Her eyes were unfocused, gazing at something far away, something only her disoriented mind could see. Her expression wasn't one of terror, more of childlike confusion and cold. Daniel approached slowly. "Mrs. Price?" he asked, voice warm. "You're all right? We're here to get you home." She blinked at him 3 times, slow. Recognition flickered, unsure, ghost-like. Then Bruin moved forward, not rushing, not leaping. He walked until he stood just in front of her, then stopped. He didn't bark or nudge her. He simply stood, placing himself between her and the wind, his body serving as a windbreak. Eleanor looked at the shepherd. Her eyes began to focus. "Oh, hello," she whispered, almost like greeting a memory. Bruin's ears softened. Daniel bent down, placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You got turned around. It happens. But we'll take you back now." Her lips trembled as she nodded. They brought Eleanor to her feet. She moved slowly, leaning on Daniel's arm. Bruin walked alongside her, watching, guiding, but not pulling or pushing. He glanced up at her periodically, checking her balance, checking her breathing. Bruin wasn't performing heroics. He was offering presence. At the edge of the forest, the search party spotted them. Eleanor's daughter burst forward, wrapping her arms around her mother with sobbing relief. "Mom, you scared us. We didn't know." Eleanor patted her daughter's arm gently. "There was a dog," she murmured. "He stood by me. He kept the cold away." Her daughter looked at Bruin, who looked back with calm, unassuming eyes, as if to say, "I only did what felt right." The ranger approached Daniel quietly. "Your dog trained?" Daniel shook his head. "Not as a K9. He just knows how to be with someone." The ranger nodded in quiet respect. Later that evening, back in the warmth of the living room, Daniel sat cross-legged on the rug while Bruin settled beside him. The fireplace cast soft flickers of gold and amber across the walls. Daniel reached to the shelf and took down the collar. The leather and brass gleamed softly in the firelight. This time, when Daniel settled on the floor, Bruin didn't hang back. He approached, slowly, but confidently. He sat in front of Daniel, not rigid, not guarded, but upright and steady. Daniel held out the collar in open hands, not to impose, but to offer. Bruin sniffed it. Then he looked at Daniel, not down, at him, and something unmistakable passed between them. Not ownership, not obedience, but mutual choosing. Daniel's voice was barely above a breath. "You're home, if you want to be." Bruin lifted his head. Then, he nudged the collar gently with his nose. A clear, silent yes. Daniel slid the collar around Bruin's neck, slow, careful, respecting every inch of the gesture. It was not a badge, not a mark of possession. It was a symbol of belonging, granted by Bruin himself. When it was fastened, Bruin did something simple and profound. He lowered himself, pressed his body along Daniel's side, and exhaled. A deep, heavy breath of surrender, not submission, trust. Bruin no longer slept against walls. He no longer watched every doorway. Tonight, he slept in the center of the home, the center of warmth, with the certainty that he was loved and that safety no longer needed vigilance. In the quiet closing of this story, we are reminded that the miracles of God do not always arrive with thunder or bright angels. Sometimes they come through the slow healing of a wounded heart, through a dog who finally feels safe enough to rest without guarding the door, and through a man who learns that gentleness can be stronger than fear. In our everyday lives, we each face winters of the soul, moments of worry, loneliness, and uncertainty. But God walks beside us even then, guiding our steps and sending comfort in forms we might overlook. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need encouragement today, and leave a comment to tell us your thoughts. Type Amen if you believe in the quiet miracles God sends. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, protection, and strength. And please remember to support the channel by pressing subscribe so we can continue bringing stories of hope, compassion, and quiet redemption.